to a special episode of the Superhero Cinephiles podcast. I'm your host, Perry Constantine, and I'm joined by a returning guest, and that's Gordon Dymowski. Gordon, how you doing today?
Pretty good. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. So the reason for this special episode is we got a big announcement from James Gunn and Peter Safran about the new DC slate of movies, TV shows, and all that kind of stuff. And, you know, I figure every single podcast in this space is doing something similar, but I thought it'd be good to just kind of put something out and talk about it and kind of get our impressions out about it. And I was put out a call on Twitter, and you were nice enough to volunteer your time to come on to talk about this. So thank you for doing that.
No problem. I mean, when I heard the news, I was actually pretty stoked because I was pleasantly surprised by some of the choices, especially the first thing that was announced. I think after a period where we had maybe a focus more on kind of, being very much about mythology and high drama and having it basically degenerate into a Three Stooges style existential food fight. It's nice to actually see that, okay, these are actually things that I would want to watch. And it feels like there's at least some thought behind the plan rather than just like throwing stuff out there the way it's been in the past.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree as well. Before we dive too deep into that, though, let's kind of talk about how we got to this point, right? So obviously we had Discovery bought out Warner Brothers, David Zaslav took control, and ever since Zack Snyder stepped away from the DCEU, it's just been kind of all over the place tonally, right? We've had DC, and James Gunn even mentioned this in his announcement. He said, DC was just kind of like, farming out their IPs to anybody that they thought could do something without any real sort of plan in mind for it. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. And it's not all been bad by any means. We've gotten some good stuff out of it. Like, we got there's some great casting choices, at least from what came from the Snyderverse. I thought pretty much all the casting choices outside of Ezra Miller, I thought were very well done. We got Patty Jenkins' Wonder Woman, and we got Jason Momoa's Aquaman movie, directed by James Wan, and we got Shazam, and then we got stuff that was, also kind of just an odd choice, like going with Matt Reeves' Batman with Robert Pattinson, which is not really part of anything. And then we had the Joker with Joaquin Phoenix, which again is not really part of anything.
Yeah, it felt very much like, it reminded me of Marvel in the 90s, where you had the bad Punisher movies. They sell off in the lead into their filing for bankruptcy. They sell off the Fantastic Four and Spider-Man to other companies. There's a bunch of, there's that really bad Captain America movie with J.D. Salinger's son. And it felt like DC, at least leading into Zack Snyder, as much as there's a lot of, he might not have been the best guy for the job stylistically, I think that there's at least an effort to kind of go, the approach was, okay, we got to catch up to Marvel. And I think between Snyder stepping down, you kind of had the whole Walter, and I'm gonna mess up his last name. Hamada, thank you. Kind of did a different thing where it's like, okay, well, we're going to have different movies and different multiverses. So there was the Matt Reeves Batman. There's the Batgirl movie that Snyder later scrapped.
Not Snyder. It was Zaslav who scrapped the Batgirl movie.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry, Zaslav. Yeah, and remember, Zaslav is the guy who brought us Honey Boo Boo. Let's keep that in mind. Yeah, he's a reality guy. But there was and then there was all sorts of reshoots around the Flash movie because of Ezra Miller's activities, as well as some other stuff that was kind of going on. And it really felt like, at least the initial Snyder concept was an effort to go, okay, we're going to try to put together some thought. And it seems like when Gunn came in, he came in with, he had just been fired from Marvel because of trolls on Twitter. Then
Right.
DC had him do the Suicide Squad sequel, which was really
Mm-hmm.
good. Out of that came Peacemaker. And I think what DC saw is that Gunn has a sensibility of he knows comics. He
Mm-hmm.
can see the inherent goofiness of them, but he's also really good at finding character beats where you might not see them. I mean, nobody ever said, like, uh, even as early as, say, 5 years ago, no one would say, Peacemaker, that's going to be a really cool streaming series. Um,
Mm-hmm.
with Suicide Squad, the fact that he managed to make a sequel that basically flipped expectations on their head. I mean, the first 15 minutes are you're expecting to see one thing, and you find it becomes another movie because the first team gets
Mm-hmm.
killed off at the beginning. And I think like Gunn, the way I think Gunn is the kind of the creative mind, and Sassman, is that his last name?
Safran.
The Peter Safran.
Peter
Peter
Safran. Yeah.
Safran is like Safran is the business guy.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's some thought put into it. I love the fact that Gunn didn't say like this is our 8 to 10 year plan. He said this is what we're willing to announce right now, and we've got other stuff coming down the pike,
Mm-hmm.
which to me is very refreshing. After the whole Snyder, here's our timeline for the next 10 years until it's not.
Yeah.
So I think there's a real intelligence and a real. It feels like there are adults in the room right now, if that makes
Mm-hmm.
sense. I think there's a
Absolutely. Yeah.
real kind of thought behind it.
One of the things Gunn did too, and this kind of piggybacking off what you had said, is he had done something that I thought probably would have seemed impossible at the time, which was he made a movie with the Suicide Squad that was both consistent with the Suicide Squad movie that was already out with David Ayers, but also managed to not be chained down by it and still managed to be its own thing and be a lot more entertaining too, and also still have Gunn sensibility wrapped up in there. And then he went
Mm-hmm.
from that to Peacemaker. I mean, and I had said this when we did our Peacemaker episode. I thought, okay, this is clearly just a vehicle because they want to get more mileage out of John Cena because he's, up and coming action star. So they're just tossing him this. I don't know if it'd be any good. I'm not sure if I'm going to be interested in it. And then even when it premiered, I just kind of let it sit for a few weeks or so until about episode 5 came out, and everybody online was saying, dude, you got to watch Peacemaker. And I checked it out, and I was blown away by how well it was. I mean, talk about, finding character bits. That was it. It was an amazing exploration of character.
Yeah, and I think Gunn understands how to balance that need to be comic booky with the need
Mm-hmm.
for really grounding it in solid characterization. That
Yeah.
I mean, the fact that in his Suicide Squad he pulls, he pulls Arm Fall Off Boy from the Legion, calls him the detachable kid. That's kind of his sensibility. It's like he gives even wacky characters have a sense of seriousness about them, and that's what I think.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's what he brings to the table. He's also not afraid of like bright colors and light and sunshine.
Yeah.
He's also willing to take.
Well, yeah. I mean, that's a. Sorry. Go ahead.
I was about to say he's also willing to take on very morally ambiguous and goes to the in terms of plot. Like I'm thinking with Suicide Squad, there's they know they're going to get killed if they don't defy the mission. But there's also that scene at the end between Cena and Flag where they're fighting over the ethics of the situation. Most directors with comic book movies wouldn't go there. He did.
Also, too, and this is going into what you said about the colors and how he makes things. He's able to ground things even if they seem comic booky. I mean, yeah. I mean, he had freaking Polka Dot Man in that movie. He had he had freaking Polka Dot Man in that movie and made him manage to seem like a grounded character. King Shark, right?
Right.
And he did the same thing with the Guardians movies, where King Shark felt like the most human character out of everyone, even though he's a giant CGI shark with Stallone's voice. And he did the same thing with Groot, right? Groot was this, big monosyllabic or trisyllabic, I guess technically, creature, and managed to be the most human character in that movie. And so he's able to take these really wild concepts, and he's able to show that you don't need to ground things by setting it in the real world or by darkening everything up. And I mean, I love Matt Reeves' the Batman movie as much as anybody, but I am also tired of this idea that Batman has to be grounded in a real world setting. We've seen that time and time again. We can have something a little bit different.
Yeah, I think that, and in looking at a lot of his selections, um, especially the first one that came out, you can, and I'll be honest, that when they announced Creature Commandos was like their first project, it's like, okay, yeah, it's a guy who understands comic history and isn't afraid to embrace the kind of sillier side of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so let's run down the list actually, and go down what we got here. So, the ones here, and I'm not sure if this is in the one that's going to be the one that's released first, is Superman Legacy, which
Oh,
is going to
okay.
be that's going to be like the start of the DCU, but it's not an origin story. It seems similar to what Matt Reeves did with the Batman, where it's going to be like a story set in like year 2 or year 3 that he's out there, right? He's been around for a little bit. We know the main cast already, so we don't have to worry about reintroducing everybody. But it's going to focus on him trying to balance his Kryptonian heritage with his human upbringing. Um, and one of the things I loved about this is Peter Safran said he is kindness in a world that thinks that kindness is old fashioned. And I love that idea because I think that was one of the things that made the Chris Evans Captain America movies so strong, was that idea that almost man out of time ethics that Cap had, that contrasted with the cold hard realities of a post 9/11 America. And I thought that movie perfectly showed that, yeah, you can have a guy who has this kind of moral code, and set him in a modern day, and it can still be very realistic. It doesn't have to seem hokey or old fashioned or anything like that. So I was really happy to hear about that. What did you think?
I was really glad to hear it too, because we need a halfway decent Superman movie. I think we've spent too much time with, tortured, gloomy Superman. This is someone who is, yes, they're struggling with their heritage, but hearing things about kindness and empathy, I think those are things that, to be honest, I think is what people are looking for in movies right now. And I
Mm-hmm.
think bringing Superman back to the idea of, he's not just a big blue Boy Scout. You know, he's, you know, he has issues, but he's also like, it's returning him to the ideal that like Chris Reeve tried to embody. It's just, he's a decent person trying to do the right thing. He just
Right.
happens to fly.
Exactly. Yeah. Now, one of the things that I find interesting about this is the decision to recast the role and to keep Henry Cavill out of it, because Gunn seemed to have left the door open for Jason Momoa as Aquaman, for Gal Gadot as Wonder Woman, for Ezra Miller as the Flash, and we'll get into that one later. But when it comes to Superman and Batman, they seemed almost determined to do a recasting. Um, Now, I'm one of the guys who feel I did not like the Snyder movies at all. I thought that Man of Steel, I like the first half of Man of Steel up until Jonathan dies. I was on board. But then after that moment happens, it just completely lost me, and then it kept on getting worse from that point on. But I thought there were some really good ideas in there, and I thought Cavill had some really good um, beginnings as Superman. He had some very nice shades of it, and then when we got to again, I hated the ultimate cut of Batman v Superman. I know everyone says it's better. I say it's more consistent, but it doesn't make it better. I think a lot of the problems are still there. Um, but it showed him, acting as an investigative reporter in some degree, and I like that aspect of it too. And so we see him in all these different iterations, and then again, the Justice League cut. lots of problems with that. But one of the things I loved is that Cavill actually seemed to have a chance to be charming as Superman. Bad CGI
Mhm.
lip aside, I think he kind of showed us, he gave us a glimpse of what he could do if he had the right director, if he had the right script. And the fact that, he got, stuck in the middle of this, push and pull between Dwayne Johnson and Warner Brothers I think he was made an unfortunate casualty of that. What do you think about the idea of keeping other actors in, but recasting Superman?
Well, I think with the approach that Gunn wants to take, you need a younger actor,
Hmm.
and I think Cavill. In all fairness, I think he's probably because I think he's in his like mid-30s, maybe early to mid-30s. I think he might be a little old for the role.
Hmm.
I do think that and Gunn even came out and said that that Cavill was quote unquote dicked around by the studio
Hmm.
because of the whole thing with Dwayne Johnson, and so I I would love to have Cavill at least get a fair shot at the role one more time. And I know that Gunn has kind of said that certain movies are going to be part of an Elseworlds branded line. So like
Hmm.
the Joker sequel and the Reeves Batman. I'd love to see him at least get one more shot because I
Yeah.
think that I um didn't like the Just first movie except for those scenes. Um, I didn't care too much for Man of Steel. Um, Batman v Superman. It was I saw the ultimate cut. I want my those 3 hours of my life back. Um, I just I really I really think, and I think it's not just Snyder's direction. I think it's also some huge script problems. So I
Hmm.
think it would be nice to give Cavill, maybe you give him one of those an Elseworlds project where he actually gets to be a halfway decent Superman, and give him one more shot at it. So I do think um, for Gunn's intended project. Now there may be a project down the line that he gives to Cavill, but I think he deserves at least one fair shot, another crack at the role, if only that
Hmm.
he can be part of a script that would allow him to be Superman.
Yeah, agreed.
I think
Yeah, it
that's
might
just
be
fair.
interesting. Well, here's some things I'm thinking about just in my mind as you mentioned that, and especially if you're looking at him as more of an older Superman. I mean, if you could get Ben Affleck to come back, you could probably actually do a Dark Knight Returns in live action properly, instead of like the kind of Dark Knight Returns esque stuff we got in Batman v Superman. And because in that story, Superman is supposed to look perpetually young anyway, so it would make sense for Cavill to look younger than Batman anyway. Um,
Hmm.
but also, we could do something like, one of the images that Gunn tweeted out was of Kingdom Come. We could see him in like a Kingdom Come movie or something like that, or whatever happened to Man of Tomorrow, or any sort of one of those timeless out of continuity stories or something that we could use with Superman. I think would be interesting to see what they do with that. And yeah, and I hope we get something like that at some point. Um, I was
Hmm.
also thinking about this idea of him struggling with his Kryptonian heritage, and I think one way you could do it that I think would feel unique is, did you read Superman Smashes the Klan?
Yes, I did. Yes, I did. Yeah, I'm with you. I think he would work in that story because you need someone who's going. One, it gives him a good crack at the role, but also it it gives him a chance to. It's out of continuity, but I think he's got Cavill has that kind of classic 1930s esque look. I mean, you know what I mean? He's got just
Hmm.
that vibe about him. I mean, he's really good in Man from Uncle.
Yes, yeah. He was the only reason I sat through Man from Uncle.
Yeah, I mean, granted, I think he leans a little too much into the Robert Vaughnness of the role, but
Hmm.
he's good in that setting. And I think if you put Cavill in a Superman Saves the Klan type setting, and you can that I think would be perfect for him because I do think he deserves another shot at the role because
Hmm.
he did kind of get pushed and pulled. Give him a script that he can really lean into, and let him just let him that be let that be his last hurrah.
Yeah. So the other project that's listed here in the article I've got open in front of me is Supergirl Woman of Tomorrow, which is taking inspiration from the recent Tom King miniseries. And Gunn said that this would be a very different type of Supergirl and much more hardcore. He said, we'll see the difference between Superman, who was sent to Earth and raised by loving parents from the time he was an infant, versus Supergirl, raised on a rock, a chip off of Krypton, and who watched everyone around her die and be killed in terrible ways for the first 14 years of her life and then come to Earth. She is much more hardcore and not the Supergirl we're used to. Now, I haven't read Woman of Tomorrow yet, but I understand it is amazing from what everyone has said. And I think, when they talked about doing a Supergirl movie, I was getting flashes to the Supergirl TV show.
Didn't know Supergirl had a TV show. Oh wait, yeah, I'm sorry, Mad Cow.
Oh, were you serious? I was talking about I thought you were making a joke.
Oh no, I completely blanked on the CW series.
Okay.
So, folks, I'm over 40. Please understand. Things happen.
One of the things that, I thought about, because if you're going to have a Superman and a Supergirl both in movies, you got to find a way to differentiate them. And I think it was smart of the CW to hold off on doing a Superman TV show until after Supergirl had ended, because otherwise it feels like that Supergirl show, it felt very tonally consistent with what we'd expect from Superman. And so seeing this idea here, based off the Tom King series, I think I'm really curious about this. I wasn't really interested in the Woman of Tomorrow miniseries, but now I'm really curious to check it out. What are some of your thoughts about this Supergirl project?
I'm curious to check out. I want to check out the comic because I know King. For me, he's a very hit or miss writer. Like I loved his work on. I love Strange Adventures. And I really enjoyed
Mr. Miracle.
I'm enjoying his Human Target series. Mr. Miracle, Human Target. I thought that I wasn't a big fan of. I liked his approach in Heroes in Crisis, but that's a book that to me felt very much. You could tell that the editors had a heavy hand in it. And it seemed like he wanted to go one way, but was told to go another way. So it's mixed feelings, but I'd say I like the approach, just not the execution. And I also I didn't really care for his Rorschach series. It was just kind of there. So I think as a writer, he does some really interesting stuff about, kind of the impact of heroic experiences on the superhero.
Vision was a great series. I thought that was. I'm not sure if you read his Vision work, but yeah,
definitely.
that was amazing.
Yes, I did.
I liked most of his Batman. I know a lot of people soured on it at a point, but I was fine with it for the most part. I thought maybe it ended a little anticlimactically, but otherwise I was mostly okay with it. I thought his Superman series, what was it? I think it was called Up in the Sky. That was brilliant. I love that.
Yeah, his Batman I have mixed feelings about, but it's also, again, I appreciated the approach. I just didn't care for the execution. Like I'm not soured on him. It's just he's one of those writers that I either really, really like or I'm kind of meh. I'm not like, oh, that's garbage. Let's throw it out. So
right,
because I do think he has a very unique take on superheroes. Yeah, and I think it'll be different to have a Supergirl who might be more hardcore, but who isn't. But part of it is a reaction to growing up on a floating rock in space. So I think, and I think knowing Gunn's approach, he does it. A lot of that kind of content he does with sensitivity, both also a sense of realism. So even if he's not the director of that, I think he's looking at it from the standpoint of how do we do this in the best way where it's not just, it's not an Image comic come to life.
It does. And I think with Peacemaker, he proved that he can definitely do that, because there you've got this character with this very rough upbringing who discovers a moral code through that. And we get a very complex portrayal as opposed to something you'd see like you said, in like an early 90s Image comic, or something you'd see in like the Snyder movies where it's just, violent origin equals edgy superhero, and that's kind of what we're going with. And Gunn doesn't seem interested in that kind of stuff, so I think we'll definitely get something nuanced out of that. So yeah, that's the one I'm probably the most curious about, just based on what we see here. The next one that was
Hmm.
announced here that's on this list is The Brave and the Bold, which is going to be this is going to this and this is something I've been waiting for a long time. Is that they're going to, just like I said about Matt Reeves' Batman, as much as I love that movie, I am kind of disappointed that we keep going back to this well of let's put Batman in the real world when he's got all these colorful characters, he's got this colorful world, and it's cool to see, a dark Batman as a contrast to that kind of craziness around him. Um, so I think when they announced this, I thought it was great because they said, okay, so Matt Reeves is doing the more grounded, realistic Batman that people have come to expect in movies. And so let him do that. And he's doing that on his own. But this is going to lean into the fact that we can also have a Batman that's set in the DC universe. We can have a Batman who has sidekicks, who has allies in Gotham. And the fact that it's going to team him up with Damian Wayne is and very heavily influenced by Grant Morrison's Batman run. And Gunn described Damian as our favorite Robin, a little son of a bitch, an assassin, and a murderer. And he said that it would explore a very strange sort of father and son story. I'm totally on board with all of this. How did you feel about Brave and the Bold?
I'm actually curious now because it's one of the things. The one thing I kind of wish, and I know they wouldn't do this, but like I loved an early in Morrison's run where Dick Grayson was Batman, and he's basically mentoring Robin, and
Mm-hmm.
Damien's all like, "Yeah, let's go kill them," and Dick is like, "No, we don't do that." And Dick is also struggling with trying to be Batman because
Mm-hmm.
he's not Bruce Wayne. Um, it'll be interesting to have Bruce Wayne as you know the father because most of the Batman Robin relationship have been portrayed. It's like you've got the Adam West, the Burt Ward kind of, yeah, he's the son for lack of a better word.
Mm-hmm.
You've had Chris O'Donnell, who, okay, he played a character called Robin. We can agree on that. Uh, there is, if you want to be really kind of tangential about it, uh, the character that Joseph Gordon-Levitt plays in the third Nolan Batman film, it's supposedly hinted that he either is Robin or was called Robin. There's that kind of subtle little in joke, and then
Mm-hmm.
of course Zack Snyder. You see the Robin shirt with the graffiti, "Ha ha, the joke's on you."
Right. We've also had Brenton Thwaites as Dick Grayson on the Titans too, and we got to see we didn't see him in season one, but starting in season two, they brought in Bruce Wayne, so we got to see some of their dynamic too.
Right. Yeah. So it'll be good to have like um it kind of not just having a father telling his son, "No, Damien, we don't kill people," but also dealing with father stuff, where this is
Mm-hmm.
a kid who didn't really know who his father was until recently, who was brought up by assassins, whose mother has a very, um, you know, depending on the author, obviously she is not with is not with Batman.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious. It's not where I would have gone with a Batman movie, but that's why I'm curious about it because it's not the usual direction. Grant Morrison is good, has enough of a love of like the kind of interesting little corners of the DCU that I
Mm-hmm.
think would really fit kind of Gunn sensibility.
Absolutely, yeah. If and I think, yeah, I mean, if you look at that Batman and Robin run that Morrison did, I think that's a perfect example of what seems to be the approach Gunn is taking. He's gonna play with the weirdness stuff of it. He's gonna play with the colorful side of stuff, but it's still gonna have that. It's gonna be grounded in that characterization, and I think Morrison definitely nailed that in that series. Um, and like you pointed out, like it wasn't actually Bruce under the cowl in that series. It was actually Dick. Um, Most of the interactions with Bruce and Damian as Batman and Robin came afterwards in the Peter J. Tomasi run, which I've just started reading now, and they do some really interesting stuff with that relationship. So I just love the fact that we are going to that they're embracing the fact that, well, we've got two Batmen, so let's use this opportunity to explore them in different environments. We don't have to do solo Batman movie. We don't have to have two competing solo Batman series of movies. We can have the solo Batman movies that Reeve is doing, and then here we have the Batman team up movies, for lack of a better word. And I think and I think calling it The Brave and the Bold is a very good move for that too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think too, um, it also provides, I think, for a little differentiation, because if Gunn's planning to have the whole, like, all the stuff that we were doing before is going to fall under Elseworlds,
Mm-hmm.
um, it provides for a lot more continuity than, like, okay, you've got the Batman 2 and Batman with Robin, whereas you
Mm-hmm.
go Batman to Brave and the Bold. It's like consistency in, with the Brave and the Bold 2, you'll have Batman and whoever,
Yeah.
So I think I like that he's actually thinking this stuff through, and not just, oh, we're going to do this movie, this movie, this movie. And it's not the usual suspects or even the usual approach.
Right. In a way, it seems almost too that they're taking a note from what Marvel has been doing with the Spider-Man movies in the MCU, because we did 5 solo Spider-Man movies. So instead of just doing more solo Spider-Man movies, we're going to make kind of a mix of a solo Spider-Man movie and Marvel team up. So you have Spider-Man and Iron Man pops up, or you have Spider-Man and then you've got Nick Fury running around. Then you've got Doctor Strange in the most recent one. So they're playing around with the idea of how Spider-Man interacts with these different characters.
Mm-hmm. And it's also be good too, because we don't know what kind of connective tissues there's going to be. Because I know Gunn is committed to, at least on the animated side, having people who can do the voice as well as play it live action.
Right.
But we might see, if down the road they're doing, let's say, a Metal Men animated series in like year 3,
Mm-hmm.
you have like the Magnus Institute assigned in like the Brave and the Bold. So I think there's enough. I think there's enough there to play with, where it's not as it's not as lockstep as, say, Marvel has been for the past few years, but it's
Mm-hmm.
also kind of. And I think that the comforting thing is that the two comforting things to me are that, one, Gunn has said this is what we're comfortable with announcing right now,
Mm-hmm.
so that we know that there are other plans for Chapter 1. What he calls
Mm-hmm.
Chapter 1. I'm also glad that they're not laying out their whole. They just said it's an 8 to 10 year plan, but it sounds like there's room for like improvisation and moving things around. So it's not like, okay, it's not like the Snyder version where they had to cancel several movies because Batman v Superman was just what it was.
Right.
So, but I think Brave and Bold is real. It's one that I'm curious about. And I'd love, but I like the approach.
It also, and depending on how they go with it, if they're going to have like a different team up in each iteration of it. So if, like, this first one is going to be with Batman and Damian Wayne as Robin, maybe the next one we could see like a Batman Superman story or something where we can actually see them working together. And I would love to see how Gunn approaches that relationship, as opposed to, because I think the laziest idea in fandom is Batman and Superman hate each other. So, and I like it more
Mm-hmm.
when it's a much more complex respect. They respect each other, even though they disagree on almost everything. And I think that's a lot more interesting. Um, so yeah, it'll be cool to see, and it gives you a chance to explore these relationships that Batman has with these characters in a deeper way than you'd get a chance to really in like a Justice League movie or something like that.
Batman becomes a character. He's not just Batman.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
The next one here on the list is Paradise Lost, which is a Wonder Woman prequel series for HBO Max. And this is going to be exploring the Amazons of Themyscira before the birth of Diana. And Safran said it's going to be like a Game of Thrones-ish story, and it's going to expand on political intrigue behind a society of all women. And Gunn said, how did that come about? The idea of the origin of Themyscira. What's the origin of an island of all women? What are all the beautiful truths and the ugly truths behind all of that? And what's the scheming like between different power players in that society? Now, I'm not the biggest Wonder Woman fan. I I don't think I even own any. I've read Wonder Woman Earth 1, the Grant Morrison one. Didn't really care for it too much. It's like probably the one Grant Morrison thing I've read that I didn't really like that much. And I haven't really read any of her other stuff. So, I'm meaning to maybe eventually get around to it. Maybe after I chip away at the massive TBR pile I currently have. Um, and the fact of, and if we're talking about Themyscira without Wonder Woman, it just on paper, the concept doesn't really seem appealing to me a whole lot. What did you think about this?
I can see doing a kind of something set on Themyscira, like a
Mm-hmm.
fantasy, high fantasy series. I've read Wonder Woman off and on, so it's like I think there are different approaches you can take with her. Um, I think though a Game of Thrones style series, like I I'll be honest, I saw the when I watched like the first episode or two of Game of Thrones, I realized I liked it better when it was produced by the BBC in the mid 1970s, starred Derek Jacobi, and was called I Claudius. That kind of political intrigue, backstabbing. It's one where I'd have to really. It's not something that grabs my interest. I'd probably watch the pilot just to check it out, but I don't think it's a bad idea. I just don't. I don't. The two don't match for me. That
Mm-hmm.
it just doesn't. It doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to. I mean, I could very well be proven wrong. Like with Peacemaker, I thought that was not something I would be into, and I ended up loving it. So we'll see what happens. But on paper, right now, that's probably the one I'm least interested
Hmm.
in. But I'm on to the next one. That's probably the one I'm also not as invested in is Booster Gold, an HBO Max series. So, Booster Gold. People who don't know, time traveling hero, and Safran described it as a loser from the future who uses basic future technology to come back to today and pretend to be a superhero. And Gunn then added that he has imposter syndrome as a superhero. Um, and they're going to be leaning into the comedy aspects of it. And like, I'll just be honest right here. I've never been a big fan of Booster Gold. Whenever he's popped up I've never read his solo titles. Whenever he's popped up in other titles, I just kind of like, you know, grunted my way through it because the character just never really appealed to me. What do you stand on Booster Gold?
Uh, I think the only time Booster Gold for me really worked was in 52, the series 52, that 52-week series that
Mm-hmm.
came right after I think Final Crisis,
Infinite Crisis.
Infinite Crisis. Um,
There have been so many crises; it's understandable.
yeah, yeah. Where he took on a new identity because he was trying to at least validate himself because he kind of felt like, okay, I've been the goofball for so long, now I need to be a hero.
Mm-hmm.
I could see a show like this working if it's like a half-hour comedy where um, it's not like it's not like Peacemaker done for laughs, but like
Mm-hmm.
a nice short little concise. I'm not a big Brewster Go fan because I think that whole concept of the goofball hero has been overdone and overdone for so long it doesn't feel as fresh. So I
Mm-hmm.
think doing a nice compact little like half hour comedy over a series of weeks, I think that's probably the best you can do with them. It's not
Mm-hmm.
something I'm going to be watching every week, but it's something that I'd like to see what they do.
Yeah. Now, even though I'm not the biggest fan of Booster Gold in the comics, and I haven't really cared much for him when he's popped up in different things. Didn't care for him when he popped up in Smallville. I know he appeared in Legend of Tomorrow, played by Donald Faison. I haven't seen that yet, but I'm curious about that because I love Donald Faison. But um, but one of the things I will say is if there is anyone that I think could get me interested in Booster Gold, it would be James Gunn because this does seem like the kind of thing that's totally in his wheelhouse, right? You've got this, you know, C-list hero who is, not so serious. He's got a lot of issues. He played for laughs a lot. I could definitely see Gunn doing something interesting with that. So like I probably won't be checking out any Booster Gold comics anytime soon, but I could see myself liking this show when it comes out.
Mm-hmm. Well, I have seen Donald Faison as Booster Gold on Legends of Tomorrow. He's actually one of the highlights of that kind of final ending season. And if James Gunn is listening to this, hire him for your show. Because I think he did a really good job at really highlighting kind of the goofiness of the character. But yeah, it does fit into Gunn's kind of I think Gunn really likes taking obscure people and obscure characters and going, okay, what can I find in this that can give them a little bit of a kick? What can I do that gives this character resonance? I mean, again, neither one of us would have thought, oh, Peacemaker is going to be a really interesting character to talk about toxic masculinity and dysfunctional households and kind of clandestine government missions. We wouldn't be talking about him. We'd probably be talking about like a Checkmate series or something that's a little bit more well known. So, but yeah, I think I like Booster Gold. I'm curious. I'm probably not a big fan either, but I at least check it out.
Yeah. Next one we have Creature Commandos, which is going to be an animated series to start off at least. And in the comics, they took a bunch of classic monsters like Frankenstein's monster. They had a werewolf character, a vampire, and a gorgon, and they were fighting Nazis in World War II. But this is going to be a modern take, and Gunn's going to be writing every episode. He's actually finished writing every episode so far. There's 7 of them, so it's already in production. And he says that shows like this are going to allow them to tell stories that are gigantic, but without spending $50 million an episode. And there hasn't been anyone announced for the voices yet, but they are looking for actors who can do both the voices in the animated series and then also play these characters in live action, which is an interesting idea. And now I've never read anything with the Creature Commandos in the comics, but I do love the idea of monsters fighting Nazis. So maybe we can get a modern take on that aspect of it.
Yeah. Well, I actually have read the Creature Commandos because they started in the 80s with Weird War Tales. And it was basically the Universal monsters with a human guy fighting Nazis in World War II. Tim Truman revived them in the 2000s. And they were they introduced like a creature from the Black Lagoon guy and a mummy, and then they were actually part of the New 52 for a while, but it's kind of a blink and you miss them moment.
Was that a good series? Was that worth the read?
The Weird War Tale stuff, yeah, because it's just But again, I was reading this stuff when I was 12, so monsters, Nazis make sense. The Truman series, I remember reading and liking, but I think it was. I wouldn't say it was like a classic. I think it was just kind of. And I didn't really catch the New 52 Creature Commandos. I think it's just one of those. It's. I love the fact that Gunn is leading off with this because it's gloriously goofy. I'm assuming it's a modern take, rather than a World War II take. But and I think it's just one of those that like. It's more nostalgia than it is like an actual. I think this material is valid. I really want to. I'm really looking forward to this, but again, it's the 12-year-old in me. It's not the grown-up adult comics fan in me. So there's a lot of bias there.
I think just like with Booster Gold, this is something that I'm more interested in because Gunn's heavily involved with it. Again, this is something that seems right within his wheelhouse. You've got this misfit crew of heroes and all that, and so I could definitely see him doing something that's a lot of fun with this, and I could also see him doing it in a way that's very tongue-in-cheek too.
And it includes GI Robot.
Oh, nice.
Which was another basically World War Tales in like the early 80s was basically 2 stories, GI Robot and Creature Commandos. And I mean, it was the robot was named Jake, which stands for J something, A something, K something, E something. But he he was kind of like Johnny Sacco's flying robot, but man size. So
Mhm.
he could shoot rockets out of his fingers. He had like a human, like a younger soldier as like a companion. He went on missions. I mean, again, you just gotta. I mean, it's just so, at the at the very least, this is going to be a fun show.
Yeah.
It may
Yeah.
not be serious the way the other stuff might be, but it's going to be fun and goofy.
Now, this also brings up another point that Gunn made is that he said that all of the stuff that's coming out, so the animated series, the video games, the TV shows, and the movies, they're all going to be linked together. I've heard this before. And
Mhm.
we've seen different aspects of this where they're like, oh yeah, this is a sequel to what this video game is a sequel to the movie, and then until the next movie comes out, and then they're like, yeah, we're not going to bother with that anymore. And so I am curious if they're actually going to be able to pull that side of it off.
And the other thing to consider are the DC animated movies. Like, are those
Hmm.
going to fall into the Elseworlds kind of? Is that going to be its own separate thing, or are they going to think, okay, well, if we do, because I know for a while the animated movies had kind of that 52 house style for a
Right, right.
while, um, in terms of character design. I wonder if that's going to. I can't see them being like super picky in terms of plot point A, plot point B. Um, I'm curious to see how they do that, but I'm also thinking with the animated stuff, they may just put it in the style of like however Superman looks in the movie, that's going to be their Superman. And if they,
Hmm.
if the actor is willing to do the voiceover, and that's where it gets a little kind of, I think, a little wonky for me because it's um like with the Marvel stuff. I know they had to hire they hired somebody else to do the voices of, I think, um, although they got most of the actors, like the, with Tony Stark, they had to hire somebody else to do the
Right.
voice because Robert Downey Jr. wasn't available. So I'm wondering how workable that's going to be. I'm just hoping this is more of a case of like, okay, there's a line in Creature Commandos about the Kerrigan run, and then the video game is Creature Commandos Kerrigan run. You
Hmm.
know what I mean? It's that kind of linkage where it's not like plot A, plot B equals. It's not like you have to play the video game and watch this movie in order to get this reference.
Yeah. See, that'll be interesting to see how they pull that off. Next one we have is Waller, which is a TV series focused on Amanda Waller, and Peacemaker season 2 is going to be put on hold, and Waller's going to be like a continuation of that. So the Peacemaker supporting characters, they'll also appear in this. Viola Davis is coming back as well. Um, and this picks up after the end of season 1 when Leota revealed the existence of Task Force X to the world. And this is going to be dealing with the ramifications. Um, and they're bringing in Jeremy Carver, who's the showrunner of Doom Patrol, as the executive producer, and also Crystal Henry, who wrote the Watchmen TV show. She's going to be involved in it as well as a writer. And I mean, Viola Davis casting as Amanda Waller was just perfect casting, and I loved even she was the best thing about the David Ayer Suicide Squad movie. I loved her in the Suicide
Hmm.
Squad. I loved the brief appearances we got of her in Peacemaker, and I've already talked up Peacemaker a lot, so obviously I'm all on board for that. So I think I'm really looking forward to this.
Yeah, I'm looking forward too because I think she's um, the place she was left with at the end of that. And I like the fact that it's going to be. I can see this being a very adult take on how espionage works. It'll probably do what Checkmate did in kind of the 90s, 2000s for kind of the espionage side of the of the
Mhm.
DC universe. Um, I think it's nice that they're actually bringing in, um, like Doom Patrol. I thought was, I'm sorry it had to go because I like Doom Patrol. So
I
I think
love Doom
bringing in
Patrol.
Jeremy Carver as, yeah, I mean I think he's looking at it. I think that approach, the way they approached both the Morrison run, but threw in lots of body horror. I think there's
Mhm.
a little. potential for genre mixing here. And I know that with Watchmen, I know Lindelof has said that basically the way he handled the writing was he kind of let his writers write, and you know, he had a very hands-off approach because
Mhm.
obviously it's very much centered on people of characters of color, and as a white dude, Lindelof kind of felt certain things where he couldn't go. So it'll be nice to bring that kind of creativity with the Watchmen series,
Mhm.
which I'm kind of glad it's only a done in one because I don't know how you would do a series two after that.
Yeah, yeah. We had talked about that before Derek's passing. We had done a 3 episode series covering the
Mhm.
Watchmen TV show, and we had come to the same conclusion. Like, it was kind of a bittersweet ending because on the one hand, it was so good that we wanted to see more, but on the other hand, it's probably for the best that we didn't see more.
Yeah, and you really, unlike, you can't be like, not every writer is Jeff Johns, where
Hmm.
you can, spin out material to the point of absurdity. But I do think it'll be interesting to see because I think Gunn is also going for genre distinctions as well, like
Hmm.
comedy, kind of political intrigue. I'm assuming Supergirl might be a little science fictiony
Hmm.
because of she comes from she lived on a rock, and so I think he's approaching it. It's kind of when you look at the MCU, you've got um, well with Phase Four specifically. Multiverse of Madness was horror, PG horror,
Hmm.
but very surreal horror. Um, Moon Knight was psychological drama. Falcon and Winter Soldier was politics. Um, Spider-Man: No Way Home was kind of goofy multiversal action. That you could do these kind of genre pieces that are part of the big whole. I
Hmm.
don't think
Well,
Gunn's approaching it. I don't think he's approaching it the way that Marvel's approached it, where everything kind of fits together. I think it sounds like it's a loose outline, and that it sounds like, at least to me, he's giving himself the room so that whatever chapter two, chapter three are going to look at, it's like what's going to be workable
hmm.
versus what I think hampered the initial Snyder run, which is okay. We've got movies we're going to do. We're going to put them in specific slots. And I know that Gunn, when he made his announcement, kind of rushed through the first movies that were the stuff that's already scheduled to be released.
Hmm.
So, it's interesting how he didn't really talk them up, and one he just kind of glossed over. But it's kind of interesting that he's like, yeah, we've got these things, we're looking forward to them, but this is where we're going from here.
Hmm. So yeah, the next one here on the list is Lanterns. This is going to be a Green Lantern TV show, different from the one Greg Berlanti was developing for HBO Max, which is now a canceled project. And uh, they had explained that Greg's vision was more of a space opera. Our vision is much more true detective, terrestrial based investigation story. And it's going to feature Hal Jordan and Jon Stewart investigating a mystery that's expected to play a big role in the main story of DCU's Chapter One. Um, I'm I'm not the biggest Green Lantern fan, but I'm curious about this because my initial instinct is if you're going to be doing Green Lantern, you would want to lean in more to the sci-fi space opera aspects of it, as opposed to the more space cop aspects of it. What did you think about this one?
Well, here's my thinking: is that when they cited True Detective, have you seen the first series of True Detective?
Yeah.
The one with okay, so it goes from kind of being very grounded, and then it turns all the way into cosmic horror.
Hmm.
Um, and they even cite take stuff from the King in Yellow, from which is a 19th century public domain set of stories about Carcosa and all that. So I can see that approach where it's like it starts grounded terrestrial, and part of it's also budget. Like
Hmm.
I think Gunn has to look at it from. Um, the only thing I hope Gunn doesn't do is I suspect he might hire Dick Wolf to produce it, because then every scene it's like beware my power, Green Lantern's light, and you hear the Law and Order chung chung between scenes, and there's like the text, Planet Oa. 12:35 p.m. So,
Hmm.
but I can see it working because I think DC kind of looked at, okay, well, we did the space thing with that Ryan Reynolds movie. Maybe we shouldn't do that again. So I could see them taking that kind of shifting approach. But
Hmm.
I'm curious too, especially since I really liked. It's the only season of True Detective I've watched, but I really liked that kind of concept of moving from one kind of genre to another, and
Hmm.
it's very seamless.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's interesting. Yeah, it's not the take I would have, but it is. It's not something like Paradise Lost where I'm just completely uninterested, but it's one where
Right.
I'm not sure how I feel about it yet. I definitely would have to see more of it. But going to
Mhm.
what you said too about genre, that actually brings us to the next one, which is Swamp Thing, and it's described as a horror film that will mark the end of DCU's Chapter One, and it's set to investigate the dark origins of the monster through the perspective of horror. Gunn said the mashup quality of seeing Rocket Raccoon standing next to Thor in Avengers Infinity War wound up being one of the highlights of the MCU, and he says that they're trying to one up that approach with Swamp Thing, um, potentially indicating crossovers in the future. He says, so this will be a much more horrific film, but we'll still have Swamp Thing interact with the other characters. Now, I thought the DC Universe Swamp Thing, which then ended up, I thought it was a great show, and I thought we kind of got robbed of the fact that it got canceled before it even finished airing, and even downgraded where they cut out the last few episodes that they were supposed to do. And the Alan Moore run is obviously classic, so I'm really interested to see what they do with the Swamp Thing.
Yeah, especially since Swamp Thing has been, you know, he's not been the best treated character in media.
Hmm.
Not just the DCU, but you've got the two '80s movies. Then you've got there's a syndicated series, I think in the '90s,
Yeah, yeah.
if I'm not mistaken. So I think taking it from the guy in the suit doing scary things to that horror aspect, and I think that because they're pulling a lot from the Alan Moore run, where he really leaned into that, uh, is I'm hoping they take more of a tone and style rather than actual plot. Because
Hmm.
some of the things that Moore did, even at the time, were a little pushing they pushed the envelope a little bit. But I do think I'm really curious. This is one that, yeah, I'd want to see because I think it'd be good to see the character done right and done
Hmm.
in in the right environment.
Did you see the DC Universe show?
No, I didn't. I've seen clips, but I haven't really watched it.
It's worth a watch. I mean, it does have that. It does have that little sogginess feeling when they get into the middle of the season, but overall, it's very good. Um,
Hmm.
so and the Wes Craven movie, that we reviewed that way early on, and it has its charms, but yeah, it doesn't. I definitely would not call it a horror movie per se. Um, so I do like that they're leaning more into the horror aspect, and since he says that Swamp Thing will interact with other characters, I imagine we could also see John Constantine come out up in here, just like he appeared in the original Swamp Thing comics. So that could be a way to introduce him into this new universe. Um, and that brings us to the last movie that was announced as part of the DCU, and then we'll talk about some of the Elseworld stuff. But that's The Authority. Um, so The Authority, not originally part of DC, if actually originally part of Wildstorm. Kind of a spin-off after Ellis took over the Stormwatch series, kind of reinvigorated it, and then ended it and replaced it with the Authority. And Safran described the Authority as kind of like Jack Nicholson in A Few Good Men, saying that they know you want them on the wall, or at least they believe that. And so, it's this team of superheroes who use extreme methods to protect the planet. And it if you've ever read the comic books, the Warren Ellis run was just absolutely great. The Mark Miller stuff, less so. Ed Brubaker also did a run at that was pretty good too. And Grant Morrison actually recently did Superman and the Authority, where he had Superman forming a new version of the Authority, which included like Apollo and Midnighter, but also some other characters mixed in there. And This was I was really curious to I was really surprised to see this one here. I was not expecting to ever see a movie based on The Authority, at least not in live action. What did you think of this announcement?
Well, I've read um, I read a lot of Ellis's run, The Authority, and although I liked it, I don't know. It seems like the one very extreme outlier for this because I'm not sure where this falls in Gunn's wheelhouse. I mean, if it had been published by if I'm not sure it's part of Wildstorm, I would much rather have a planetary movie,
Hmm.
which is another of Ellis's series.
Yeah. That was also Wildstorm.
A Wildstorm, but I don't think it was ever published. I don't know if it was carried over and published by DC the way Authority did
Oh no, no, it
was.
ended with Ellis. Yeah.
Right. Um, because I think Planetary, had it been part of that kind of DC carryover, would have been good to have a team basically investigating the history of the DC universe, where um, Ellis kind of, the series was about, you know, pulp and other kind of archetypical action stuff. This would have been a really great way. But the Authority, I'm kind of a little I'm not sure how a team that believes they can change the world and they should rule by force would fit in the modern, especially since we now have shows like The Boys
Hmm.
and to some extent the Watchmen HBO series. I'm not quite sure how it would fit. So this is one where I'm like, I'll wait until it's out on DVD or I'll wait till it's out on streaming to see it.
Hmm. One of the things that I think that it could really fit is because, and this isn't something you had with The Authority when they were being published by Wildstorm, because all the heroes in that universe, well, by the time The Authority was published, most of the other heroes, Wildstorm wasn't really publishing a whole lot else, so there was that aspect to be considered. Um, but there wasn't really any challenges, not any real challenges from other superheroes who were much more, old fashioned type of superheroes. So I think where the Authority gets interesting is in seeing a contrast with characters like Superman and Batman. And how does someone like Superman deal with something like the Authority? And this could also maybe be a lead into something like an adaptation of one of my favorite Superman stories, What's So Funny About Truth, Justice, and the American Way, where Superman
Hmm.
encounters a DC version of the Authority called the Elite, and has to deal with this idea that maybe his methods are too outdated, don't fit in with the modern world, and that contrast between the two approaches. I think that could be something interesting to explore.
Yeah, I could see something like that. But trying to do it from the Authority perspective, I mean, it would be a challenge because essentially the Authority would have to either A have to lose or B Superman would have to lose, and
Mm-hmm.
um, I'd be interested to see the story of how that would play out, even
Yeah.
though I'm not sure if it would play out well.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, but I'm not really an Authority guy, so I'm not
Okay.
sure whether that would be. Yeah.
Okay, fair enough. And then that leads into the Elseworld stuff, which so far we have three projects confirmed for this. There's the Batman Part 2. There's also the Joker sequel, which, what was that called again? Folie à Deux, which is going to introduce Lady Gaga as Harley Quinn. And I think it's supposed to be more of a musical, is what they had said too. And then Ta-Nehisi Coates' Superman film, which actually I was watching Chris Hayes, I think it was yesterday, and Ta-Nehisi Coates was on there, and Hayes had asked him, "What are you working on now?" And Coates said, "Oh, I'm working on Superman," but there's not really much else I can say. Um, so it'll be interesting to see how they do this now, because the Coates Superman film is always I've always been interested in, and one of the interesting things about it is they've never necessarily confirmed that he's going to be writing. It's going to be a black Superman, but it's not necessarily going to be Clark Kent. I don't think they've ever said it's going to be a black version of Clark Kent. Um, that could be Val Zod from James Robinson's Earth 2 run, or it could
Hmm.
be what was his name? Calvin Ellis from
Yeah.
Morrison's Multiversity, where he was not only a black Superman but also a black president. Um,
Hmm.
So I think this is I'm still interested in, but what I like the most here is the idea that they are keeping this Elseworlds option. So they're still going to be able to do stuff that's not connected to the continuity. And I think that's one of the things that I wish Marvel would do a little bit too, because it'd be nice to see some projects that aren't necessarily tied into the MCU, but they haven't really pursued that at all.
Yeah, I mean it's. I'm not really. I haven't seen the original Matt Reeves Batman, so I haven't seen it yet. So Batman 2, I don't really have an opinion on. I saw Joker and I thought it was the best Martin Scorsese fan film ever made. Um, I think so. I'm not too keen on a Joker 2. Like I kind of I know it kind of feels like the movie was made to prove because Todd Phillips and and he made a big deal about, oh, nobody goes to see my comedies. I want to do serious films, and it's like, well, dude, maybe you're just not funny. Um, and Joker just kind of left me cold, so I'm not really looking forward to Joker 2. But the Coats Superman movie, yeah, I'm very interested in because
Mhm.
I'm always I really want to see different variations on the typical superhero story, which you didn't get with the Snyder
Right.
films at all.
Yeah, and well, another thing too is, and this is where things start to get a little bit confusing because at first it seemed like Gunn's intent was a clean reboot, um, and that's one of the reasons why he wanted to recast Superman and all this other kind of stuff, and why he said that we might have uh, Jason Momoa play someone else besides Aquaman, which opens up speculation for Lobo, obviously. Um, but now we have that. Now we know that Waller is going to be continuing from Peacemaker, which is continuing from the Suicide Squad. So, and then we also have the Flash movie is still coming out, and we still get Aquaman still coming out. Shazam: Fury of the Gods is still coming out, and so it leaves this question of how much of a reboot is this really? What were some thoughts of yours on that?
Well, I think just based on Gunn's comments, I think Shazam is going to be its own thing,
Mm-hmm.
and I think I'm not. I could see them once they have the Elseworlds branding. Everything else is kind of going to be those. I think will probably end up branded as Elseworlds. So I think Shazam: Fury of the Gods. It's probably going to be in its own little weird little corner. Um, it's not going to be part of continuity, but it's not going to be part of continuity.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's going to be like a kind of a don't ask, don't tell situation. Um, it's like don't bother asking if you want it to be. That's fine. I think the Flash they've always intended it to be a reboot movie, and there are all sorts of issues with Ezra Miller that we can go into in a little bit. I
Mm-hmm.
think with Aquaman 2, I'm wondering because I know there's been talk that I think Keaton was replaced by Ben Affleck. I wonder if they're going to use that as a way to kind of close the door on the Snyderverse once and for all.
Mm-hmm.
That might be it might be that kind of that way it would allow if Momoa was contracted for like 2 Aquaman films and that's it, that releases him from his contract to do other things. It allows Affleck to be a director on some projects so that it's less um, uh, a universe thing and more just like kind of clearing the slate. Um, I'm trying to think. Is there another film besides? And then there's Blue Beetle, which they
Blue Beetle,
may
yes.
because that's being put together. Yeah, they'll probably figure out a way to fit that in with their universe with the main DC.
I believe they'd said that Blue Beetle is, even though Superman Legacy is considered the quote unquote start, Blue Beetle will kind of be like the unofficial start of it, is what they had said, or something like that.
Right.
So yeah, it looks like they're going to be folding Blue Beetle into it.
Yeah, and then I know with the Flash movie, I know that's always meant to be they're always intended to be a reboot movie. It's just a matter of what it's going to reboot. So that's probably the one kind of it's the elephant in the room, so to
Mhm.
speak.
Yeah, we can talk about. I definitely want to get to the Flash in a minute, but I first wanted to mention about just the idea of how much of a reboot is this. I mean, and there have been a. I've seen some people talking about this, saying that well, if you're going to reboot it, just reboot the whole thing. Don't just keep your stuff around. And I mean, on the one hand, I get that. On the other hand, it kind of seems like it's fitting for DC continuity to be a DC reboot to be as fucked up as it is in the comics, because they always seem to be doing that,
Mhm.
right? I mean, Crisis was supposedly a reboot, but then they're like, oh, but we're still going to keep some stuff, and then New Infinite Crisis was supposedly bringing back the multiverse, but it was also mixing in all this other stuff, and then we had Flashpoint, the New 52, which was a reboot, but it was keeping some things, and then Rebirth, which again was a reboot, but not quite, and then they had Doomsday Clock was another like reboot, but not quite. So it, I mean, part of me thinks it wouldn't really be a DC situation unless the continuity was a little fucked up.
Yeah, and I think one of the lessons of the MCU is that sometimes trying to keep an ironclad eye on continuity isn't always a good thing. Like,
Mm-hmm.
you know, WandaVision, like the idea was you didn't need to watch one thing nor a TV show to understand the movie. And it's like I saw WandaVision and I saw Multiverse of Madness at separate times, and it felt like Multiverse of Madness was there was never like a clear like yeah this is what happened to her back there. It just felt like
Mm-hmm.
you needed that backstory in order to know what was going on in the movie.
Right.
And I think with DC, yeah, you need a messed up continuity. Like I could see a gratuitous, in the middle of Superman Legacy, three teenagers come in and they're like, "Hey, join us in the future to fight crime." Oh, wait, we're here too soon. Never mind.
Mm-hmm. One of the smart things that Peacemaker did and was it kind of served as and the Suicide Squad in general, it kind of seemed like it was a soft reboot in a way, because you had some elements that were tied into the first movie, but you didn't need to watch the first movie to understand the Suicide Squad. And then in Peacemaker, they were making a lot of other references to stuff that could not have happened in the Snyderverse, right? Peacemaker talks about teaming up with Matter Eater Lad. They're referenced to all these characters that hadn't popped up in the movies at all. And I don't know where you slot those in anywhere in the Snyderverse. Um, Bloodsport mentioning that he put Superman in the ER and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I think it did kind of serve as like a soft reboot, and now they're just continuing with that. So I think it does make sense to include the Suicide Squad and Peacemaker and Waller all in the same universe.
It also feels good too because you're not starting from, the Snyder approach was you start big and operatic and, mythological, to
Right.
use one of his favorite buzzwords. With Gunn, you start small and personal and expand out. And
Hmm.
I think that's the approach that the DCU needed. The MCU had started, before 2008. If we were asked, "Hey, you want to go see an Iron Man movie with Robert Downey Jr.?" We'd both be like, "Yeah, sure, okay, pull the
Hmm.
other one."
Yeah, yeah.
Really, Robert Downey Jr.'s Iron Man, yeah, that's going to be a real success. Look what happened, and I think Gunn is learning the lesson of you start small and personal and build out.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think it and I like the idea that they're not necessarily starting off from the beginning of it. I do like the idea, because I think a lot of the DC heroes, I think, do work better if they've got some history behind them, even if we don't necessarily know what that history is. We don't need to see Superman's rocket falling in Smallville and him being raised by the Kents for the 50th time. We don't need to see the Wayne shot like we've been seeing like every goddamn year. And and it allows you to do things like, by having them have those some sort of established history already, it allows you to do things like bring in Supergirl, bring in Robin, bring in Damian Wayne, and all that other kind of stuff. And yeah, I think that approach works a lot better. Whereas Marvel, a lot of the characters aren't familiar to audiences, so you have to bring them in to begin with.
Yeah, and I think too with DC, there are more points of entry than you would. than you would believe, because it's not like in the MCU, everyone's in New York.
Hmm.
Every superhero is in New York, whereas DC has more of an imaginary geography. So you could say, okay, Smallville's in Kansas and Metropolis is wherever Metropolis is. So
Hmm.
you can do different kind of set pieces depending on your hero.
So then the other thing too is to talk about Ezra Miller as the Flash. Now, this is one of the things that annoyed me about the announcement, because they're like, well, we can't do this Superman movie with Henry Cavill, but maybe we could have Ezra Miller come back in the future as the Flash. Now, my hope is that what really is going on is that Zaslav told them, look, we've invested so much money in this Flash movie. We need it to at least try to make back some of the money we've invested in it. So just don't talk shit about Ezra Miller. Just say that you hope he's doing his recovery, and you hope it works out well for him, and just leave it at that. Because honestly, even if Ezra Miller wasn't a violent sociopath, they were still a terrible casting decision for the Flash to begin with. And so I can't see any world
Mm-hmm.
in which you look at Henry Cavill, who is like the nicest guy on the planet, and say like, we don't want him, but you're going to keep the violent sociopath because apparently he was in one good superhero movie.
It would be one thing if it were a case of like, um, if the worst thing Ezra Miller did was say get a little drunk at a karaoke bar and was a little too loud.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I, but the fact is, Miller had a history of, I mean, you just need to Google to see all the stuff that they've been involved with, kidnapping, you know, um, very abusive behavior, breaking and
Mm-hmm.
entering, um,
Grooming.
and yeah, there's a lot where it makes sense that you can't really. There's been so much money tied into the Flash movie. I personally think um, that the Flash movie, I think it's probably going to. I think it will probably not do very well because there's just so much of a stink attached to it. And I
Right.
do think that that's why I think Henry Cavill deserves another shot, because at least he tried to bring something. He just didn't have the right script, and I think
Mm-hmm.
he deserves a break. Um, I think with Ezra Miller, that kind of, he was probably the absolute worst thing about, in my opinion, about in the entire, whether it's the Joss League or the Zack Snyder's Justice League. To me, he was the weakest link, because there really wasn't. He was just, oh hey, look, I'm quirky. You know,
Mm-hmm.
um, Part of me kind of hopes, and I know this is not going to happen, but that at the end of the Flash movie, it's like you see him stop before he goes to run. He removes his mask, and it's a different actor, so that we know,
Mm-hmm.
okay, this is not the guy we're going to follow into the DCU.
Yeah.
And I'm
Yeah.
hoping that if it is a reboot, that it's kind of a, um, it's a very clear, this is where we're going from moving forward. Because at least like with all the other actors, like Ray Fisher put in an honest effort. Sorry, but Ben Affleck, no, we don't need pouty Batman. Cavill tried to do a halfway decent job. Gal Gadot did a pretty decent job. Jason Momoa did a pretty decent job. Um, but yeah, I think there's just too much of a stink behind him, and he's done too much. And I think um, it would be like a couple of weeks ago, Bill Cosby announced he was going back on tour. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
no, it's not going to be met with cheers. So
Right.
I do think the film is going to sink, but I think if Zaslav, remember the guy who brought us Honey Boo Boo, if he sees that as a loss, he'll think, okay, that just proves that approach was wrong. And Gunn will be moving ahead full steam, so
Mm-hmm.
at least he'll know that, okay, maybe spending all this money isn't the smartest thing. And even
Mm-hmm.
Gunn said, basically he said, I don't think this is a direct quote, but he said, okay, we'll support the filmmaker's visions to a point, but he also made it clear we're not making anything until the script's done. And
Right.
I think those are really key because the fact that the Flash took so many reshoots and there were so many scripting and editing problems that it's kind of like, no, we've got to be, you know unlike Kevin Feige, Gunn is a creative, and unlike Kevin Feige, although Kevin Feige has the business and production experience, what Gunn is, he's got someone who has that experience. So
Mhm.
it'll be interesting to see how the DCU progresses from this point onward.
Yeah, I agree with pretty much all of that. I mean, we could quibble about Ben Affleck's Batman. I think he did as well a job as anyone could, given what with the material he was given. And I think he would have made a really great Batman if he got a chance to do his own Batman movie, like he had originally hoped to do. But then, just the weight of expectations and him having to deal with it, it was too much for him. And I totally get that.
I was about to say, you brought up a Kingdom Come movie. You put Henry Cavill as an older Batman, Affleck as the Cavill as an older Superman, Ben Affleck as an older Batman, throwing Gal Gadot as Wonder Woman because Wonder Woman doesn't really age.
Right.
There's your Kingdom Come. And
Mhm.
hey, if you want to make that a Zack Snyder film, because I think it would fit with his style. Um,
Mhm.
I'm probably going to get attacked for saying that out loud, but I'd like to at least see a Kingdom Come movie, if not necessarily a Kingdom Come movie directed by Zack Snyder.
Mhm. Oh yeah, yeah. I think that would be a great idea. Um, Another thing too they mentioned is I think another part of it too is I think more than anyone, Cavill and Affleck are associated with the Snyderverse because they're the ones who started off. They were the ones who were in in all those Snyderverse movies, basically, with the exception of Affleck. He wasn't in Superman, but in Man of Steel. But they were kind of like the anchors of the Snyderverse, and they never really got an opportunity to break out of that. Whereas Momoa got Aquaman, he got a chance to break out of that role. Godot got Wonder Woman, she got a chance to break out of that mold as well. Um, so I think that's another big part of it is more than anyone else, those two are most associated with the Snyderverse, and so not having them really signals that this is a different right, that it's something completely new.
Mhm.
Um, I will say too, one of the things I was nervous about, especially because we had the announcements that Titans is getting canceled after this season, Doom Patrol is getting canceled after this season, and it had me wondering what's going to happen to Superman and Lois because it's getting a season 3, but after that we don't know. And part of it might be out of DC's hands because some of it will depend on what's going on with the CW. But I was really heartened when Gunn said, "Look, people seem to like Superman and Lois. It seems to have like another, 2 seasons in the tank or so. We're just going to let it run its course." That made me really happy because I think, what would I think would be nice is maybe we get 2 more seasons of Superman and Lois, and then by the time that ends, then it'd be like 2025, and it'd be time to introduce this new Superman movie. So that'd be a really interesting way to do it.
Yeah, and I think um, it would, as much as a lot of good shows are getting canceled, I appreciate that at least Gunn's willing to let Superman and Lois and other kind of entities kind of play out.
Mm-hmm.
It um I mean, it is a shame that the Batgirl movie got scrapped, but really there's nothing that Gunn can do because not only was it made before he came on board, but one of the conditions of the reason it was canceled was that the actual tax loophole is that when you purchase when you basically, if one company purchases another company, if there's anything that they determine is like not viable, and that they can't basically make money off of, that becomes a write-off as a business loss.
Mm-hmm.
And so essentially, Zaslav was looking for ways to cut corners. And, the fact is, they spent all this money on a Flash movie with all the requisite kind of drama.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I can understand and I think that would have been the one you write off because it was worth a lot more and you could get a greater tax cut. But they cut something that would have at least been, I think, a little bit more interesting.
I was wondering about the Batgirl and the Flash thing because yeah, it seems like with all the Miller controversy, the Flash would be the one that'd be the most obvious to cut. I wonder if maybe there was a cap on how much they could get back from that, or maybe they just thought even with all the controversy, we could probably still make back more from the Flash movie than we get in a tax cut.
Well, I also wonder too because you have to keep in mind that a lot of the when Discovery took over Warner, they also were inheriting some really bad decisions from that AT&T, the previous owner, made. So
Right.
it may have been that they looked at the books and they thought, okay, there may have been a cap. I mean, I'm not an expert on corporate tax loopholes or law, and but I also wonder if they looked at what was going on and it was like, okay, there's a difference between, say, cutting muscle and cutting bone
Mm-hmm.
on a metaphorical level. So they looked at, okay, we can cut muscle. Okay, we got to cut bone. And what's the business decision? And it's like maybe that cap was we could cut this 300, but it's going to take us over the cap, or we can cut this 90 million, this 90, and that's where they had to cut.
Yeah.
I mean, we'll never know because
Right.
it's not like they're going to be forthright about it. But I do think that Gunn is at least taking this with the appropriate amount of seriousness, that it's not just big pie in the sky throwing stuff out there. And I know now there's a movement to, sell the Snyderverse to Netflix for production. It's like, for those of you who are listening, you got to understand, intellectual property don't work like that.
I know.
Well, but everyone out there probably doesn't know. It's like, no, you can't do that. No.
Yeah, I'm just saying out of exasperation, just because I keep seeing this, and I'm just like, that is not at all how any of this works. Like, you guys need to go to copyright IP 101 because this is just ridiculous. It's like, no, it's not gonna. Don't get me started. Just don't get me started.
Yeah, I've got a better idea. There's this great concept called fan fiction.
Mm-hmm.
For those who want to create this, write your own fan fiction. Start, you can start a website. Just throw up we're not trying to earn money from this stuff. And just post that. Otherwise, you end up with an Alec Peters Axanar situation where Alec Peters puts out a Star Trek fan film, and part of that is he's raising money via Kickstarter. He's selling merchandise based on his fan film. Paramount says, well, you can't do that. Paramount sues, and as a result, they change their fan film rules so that you can only do like a half hour. But Alec Peters kind of thought, yeah, he's the standard holder of Star Trek. And I think with the Snyderverse people, it's like they feel like they are the standard bearers, and it's like, no, just let it go. Discover something new.
Well, also another thing too, and I just saw this. I'm a member of Public Domain Heroes on Facebook, and every now and then people will put we'll make this version of this team with public domain characters. And just this morning, someone posted an interesting idea where how would you continue the Snyderverse stuff with public domain characters in the roles of the Justice League characters? Honestly, I would be interested to see that. I would be interested to see someone take a crack at doing that.
Yeah, there's a YouTube creator by the name of Austin McDonald, and he's actually creating his own cinematic universe out of public domain characters. So like he's doing an animated kind of Pixar style film involving Atlas, which is basically a guy who is rejected by a girl, so he starts exercising and becomes a superhero. He's working on an animated version of Catman. He's actually working on a Western version of Six Gun Gorilla, and like a novel involving Spider Queen, which are all these public domain characters. It's like, yeah, maybe if you can't get the media you want, create what you're looking for. And
right.
Hey, look, there's a bunch of characters here that you can use. But yeah, I'd be willing to watch a. In fact, if Zack Snyder is listening, because we all know he listens to this podcast, he's a big fan.
After all the things I've said about some of his movies, I doubt it. Maybe Hate listens to it.
Zach, listen to me. I know you're doing the Rebel Moon, the Star Wars pitch that got turned down. I get it, but you know what, dude? Seriously, um, do your Snyderverse, but go public domain. You can go to Facebook, go to Public Domain Heroes. Just do it under a false name, because otherwise you'll get people. You'll get obnoxious fanboys. But come on, Zach. You want to.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, Zach, you should do a. I think my dream project for you is you should work with Rob Liefeld. I think the two of you would just create something unique together.
That's the diplomatic way of putting it, I think. I will say though, but I think even Zack Snyder, I don't think he's really too interested in continuing the Snyderverse. I mean, he's doing Rebel Moon for a Netflix right now, and he's doing. I think he's doing. Is he doing another Army of the Dead movie? I think I don't know, but he's got his own stuff.
Yeah, I think he's had his fill with dealing with major studios. It's like he's probably just like, you know what? I'm dealing with Netflix. I'm doing my own thing. I'm cool.
Anyway, the very last thing I want to touch on is there anything that we haven't announced that you'd be interested in seeing in the DCU? I know we mentioned, Kingdom Come or something like that, but beyond that, is there anything you'd like to see either in the DCU continuity or as an Elseworlds project?
There's a couple things I'd like to see, and I think they'd probably, would probably kind of fit. They'd probably end up becoming Elseworlds, because I'm not sure what his long-term plans are. I would love to see kind of a Legion of Superheroes animated series. I know there was one years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Whether you involve Superman or not, that would be, I think, a really cool idea. And you've got basically, decades of material to pull from. I would love to see. I'd love to see a series, and unfortunately, they did some of it with Stargirl, but I'd love to see a series inspired by the James Robinson Starman series.
Mm-hmm.
More importantly, what I'd really love to see is Sandman Mystery Theater, the series.
Oh,
because I think you could do, or a movie. And the great thing is you could literally do it. You do it black and white, but have the dream sequences in black and white CGI.
Mm-hmm.
Hire the team that does the Sandman series, because I was never a big Sandman fan for the comics, but watching the Netflix series, it's like that's the style I'd like to see Sandman Mystery Theater in.
Mm-hmm.
It's just very visual. I just love the atmosphere. That's the atmosphere I would want to see for a Sandman Mystery Theater series.
Yeah, for my part, I think there are two things that I'd like to see. First, there was reference made, and we don't know if this is confirmed or not. This is just rumors that Michael Keaton was going to be in a Batman Beyond movie, and it got canceled. Make that happen. I mean, Michael
Mm-hmm.
Keaton freaking looks like Bruce Wayne from Batman Beyond. He looks exactly like him. This is the perfect time to do that project. And you could do it as a movie in an Elseworld setting. That would be really cool to see, I think.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
Another thing I think would, and this, I just thought of another Elseworlds as I was saying that, but have you read the White Knight series? Batman the White Knight?
Oh, yes. Yes.
I don't care if it's animation. Animation might be better because you could replicate Sean Murphy's style, but I think that would be also a really cool thing to see done as an Elseworlds. And then in the DCU itself, I'd like to see an HBO Max Green Arrow series. I know we had Arrow on TV, and it was great at first, and then it varied over the course of the later seasons, but mostly enjoyable. But the one problem I always had with Arrow was it was basically just Batman, but with Green Arrow's shtick instead. And I would rather see a Green Arrow HBO series, and I think Gunn could definitely do this based on what he did with Peacemaker and how he involved politics in that. Make it very political, right? Lean into the fact that Green Arrow is a progressive superhero, and I think that would be so cool to see.
Yeah, and you play up the idea of the fact that he's a progressive superhero, yet he's also engaged in vigilante type stuff.
Mm-hmm.
he's also trying to have a halfway decent relationship. Like, I'd say get rid of the whole womanizing Ali subplot, but make it as he's also, since he at one point runs for mayor, you kind of have him brush up against, in year 3 or 4, the fact that he's now got to realize, okay, how do I balance the fact that I'm impacting a lot of people, yet I also know that there are greater structural injustices that I can't handle by just shooting an arrow at it. And plus, I dig archery, so it's like I agree with you. We need a decent Green Arrow series.
Keep an eye on my stuff, because I'm actually working on a comic book with the public domain hero, the Arrow. So I'm going to be playing with some of these ideas on my own. Okay. Show you more of that once it gets ready. But anyway, I think that about sums it up. Everything that I had to say about the DCU slate. We actually ended up talking for a lot longer than I expected us to talk. So I think both of us had a lot we wanted to say about this. Thanks so much for coming on. And why don't you tell people where they can find you?
Okay, well, you can find my written work on Amazon. Just Google Gordon Dymowski Amazon. I am also part of Chicago Doctor Who Meetup. You can also find both Chicago Doctor Who Meetup and me, Gordon Dymowski, on Patreon. I've got 2 different pages. One funds outings, one funds my writing, and my most recent works include a short story in Prosay's Case of the Defective Detective compilation, as well as a Sherlock Holmes tale in Belanger Books' Sherlock Holmes, A Year of Mystery, 1884 collection. There you go.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. And we'll have links to some of that stuff in the show notes, so people will be able to go click and find them there. Gordon, thanks again for coming on. It was a lot of fun talking about this, and it's late where you are, so I appreciate you accommodating my crazy on the other side of the world schedule to come on and talk about this.
No problem. I'm really grateful to be here. Okay. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. And that does it for this episode of the Superhero Cinephiles. Thank you for tuning into this special, and we'll be back soon with our regular episodes and our regular movie coverage. Thanks so much for listening. And always remember, superherocinephiles.com is the website, Super Cinema Pod on Twitter or Instagram. And if you go to patreon.com/Super Cinema Pod, subscribe for $1 a month. You can get these episodes a week in advance. And also you'll get access to the Superhero Cinephiles Book Club podcast, where we talk about comics and graphic novels. That's all for now, and we'll talk to you next time. If you enjoyed the Superhero Cinephiles, then you'll also love my companion podcast, the Superhero Cinephiles Book Club. All my Patreon subscribers get access to this exclusive podcast where I review superhero comics and graphic novels. Not sure what comics you want to read next or what you should dive into? I've got you covered on that. I'll be doing reviews, recommendations, and also talking to you about useful entry points if you're interested in reading some comics but don't know where you should start. Plus, you'll get access to all episodes of the main show a week before everyone else. On all of this for as little as just $1 a month. All you have to do is go to patreon.com/supercinemapod, and you can sign up at any subscription amount to get started. Thanks so much for your support, and please don't forget to rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts.
Thank you for listening. And as always, good night, good evening. God bless.